We reconvene for Liberty Conspiracy Live here on Rokfin, on Rumble, on YouTube, and on Twitter/X. Nice to have you along for the ride, fellow conspirators. I'm LG Grande, and buenos, whatever time zone you call home. The big G is here, and we're fighting for freedom. We're plotting, we're planning, we're crouching, conspiring for the days of greater freedom ahead of us on this June 3rd, 2024. It's a big day because today's my birthday. Yeah, and a happy one to you, as the Beatles would say. So I hope you had a great and beautiful weekend, everybody. We're going to have a beautiful night tonight. Join us in whatever chat you might like to join us in. If it's X, you can go in there and join other people on X. I can see the comments thanks to StreamYard. If you want to join our original crew over at Rokfin, feel free to do so. That would be great. And of course, the Rumble crowd, often they go back and forth. They go both ways, as the Scarecrow might say. And I will definitely entertain any of your comments and your suggestions for stories as well. You can always contact me on the backside of Twitter/X. That's at gardgoldsmith. And if you're finding the show because of my work for MRC TV, thank you to the folks at MRC TV. You might know me as Gardner Goldsmith there, or P. Gardner Goldsmith on the writing stuff. And I just go by at gardgoldsmith on Twitter/X. So thanks for hanging out, because I don't promote Liberty Conspiracy on my work for the MRC TV team, but some people do follow me on Twitter/X, and then they discover the show, which is pretty darn cool. So thanks for doing so. Appreciated. Mucho apreciado, as they'd say in Espanol. All right, everybody, let's see what's on tap for this birthday day, 2024. Yes, I can't wait. This is going to be a packed show. I can't wait to get your comments about some of these big news stories and insights so that we can take ideas with us, so that we can learn, take intellectual ammunition with us, and give it to future generations for the fight for freedom. Because that's why every Monday through Friday, I arrive here and pass on what I've found and ask people to pass me their information as well. That's why I put the Substack out. And on Sundays, you can find the Sunday News Assembly with at least 20 stories pertaining to liberty, where, of course, I break those apart and give contextual information, history, economics, information about philosophy, the Constitution, and hopefully there'll be some lessons there as well. If you want to find these stories each Monday through Friday and make this a good news resource for you, you can find the links to almost every story that I discuss in every show, Monday through Friday at 6, over on my X feed. And after the fact, if you want to share any of these stories in video form with people whom you think might be interested in this information, you can pause the video on Rumble and YouTube and then send it out to folks at that time code, and they'll see the presentation there as well, which would then include comments from the audience and things like that. And then every once in a while, I haven't done it once a week, but do it every few weeks or so, and I'm going to try to do it more often. I open things up by putting in the video link from StreamYard onto all the platforms that are available to do this, and then people can join us just like calling a talk show. So we've done that a few times. It's been a lot of fun, and I want to do it a lot more. So welcome to the Liberty Conspiracy, because freedom is out of fashion nowadays, and welcome to hopefully a good news source for you Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock Eastern U.S. time. Tonight on the program, everybody, we've got a lot planned, so let's check it out. Liberty Conspiracy first. The news flash. We'll be looking at the Feral Fauci edition. Then we'll open it up a little bit more deeply as we touch a couple stories in the news flash that might not necessarily be about Fauci. But then in our first major news story, we'll discuss much more in depth Anthony Fauci's reappearance. He came back out of his hidey hole before the House Oversight Committee. Overseeing what, you might ask, after you see this sort of thing and see their questions? Well, are they overseeing their Constitution and what it allows, or are they overseeing other things that kind of annoy them, and sometimes appropriately so? We'll look at that in a large context. We'll also get your thoughts on this, because I want to get the opinions of the conspirators. I've gotten to know you folks over the past year, filling in for David Knight and doing the show since we started up last year in January. And it's great to see all the great comments and knowledge that people have. Really good sarcasm, very good wit. It's just awesome. It makes my night. It's awesome. It's a great place to hang out, and I appreciate you being here. So let's talk number 2. We'll be looking at the Hunter Biden trial beginning. I'm going to move that up into the flash, I think. Just make it pretty brief. And then we'll switch number 3 to number 2. Israel rejects the so-called peace plan that Biden claimed was proposed by Israel. Hey, that's great. Awesome. That makes a lot of sense. And just like everything in the polis makes tons of sense, especially recently with the Biden administration telling us that they're expecting the Israelis to operate according to a certain set of expectations. And those expectations are expected, and they're expecting more expectations. And of course, the Israelis just continue to slaughter people in Gaza while the United States continues to expect more of your tax money to pay for more of their weapons, and they never stop. We'll look at number 5, which will be number 4. And we're also going to include, number 4 also will have some information about France getting ready to utilize D-Day, everybody, to utilize D-Day as a way to promote the visit by Zelensky from Ukraine and the introduction of French troops on the ground fighting against Russia. Seriously. That's D-Day. You know, when the Russians and the French were fighting the Nazis who were occupying France. When the West came to the shores and the Russians were in the East, and now the French are going to dedicate troops to fighting the Russians, which, of course, this is a government full of, Nazis in Ukraine. So you try to figure out the logic of that one. That's a great, great little puzzle to try to put together. You can take pieces of it and keep trying to make them fit. I don't think it's going to work. We'll look at number 5, which will be number 4. Schumer and 22 Democrats on the domestic front want the Department of so-called Justice to prosecute oil companies for what Schumer and his pals are calling, get this, they've got the chutzpah to say that they're upset at the oil companies, and they're blaming the oil companies for higher prices for you. They're saying that the oil companies are colluding and wielding monopolistic power or some sort of cabal-like power. Yeah, that's what the politicians who have total control over everything are saying. They're blustering that. Oh, it's very windy today. How wonderful. This feels great. Seriously, they're doing that. Let's check in on the Rokfin chat, and I want to welcome everybody over on X as well as you populate things. Freethinker59, hello, and welcome to June. Good to have you there. A-Rem, hi, A-Rem. Nancy Chambers, greetings, Nancy. Good to have you there. I really appreciate that. And, Max B, awesome to see the conspiracy on Grand Theft World. Got the RG shout out as well. Great job, Guard. I didn't even know that. That's stinking cool. That's great. Hey, Max, that's so cool. And thank you for the contribution. Thank you, Richard Grove, for putting Liberty Conspiracy on Grand Theft World. And by the way, tonight I had planned, if you saw Grand Theft World last night, it was just amazing. It was just amazing. You start watching at 9:30, and Richard is just a rocket. He just goes and burns it. He's got all this knowledge, all this scholarship. He's got the book cam there, and he's got the video clips that he's collected. He has it all sequenced out. And what I didn't even plan on it being like this, but what I do typically on Liberty Conspiracy each night is sort of a combination of what Richard does and what David Knight does, or, some of my MRC TV stuff. So it sort of packs that all together. It's very interesting. Thanks, Max, for letting me know. I was unaware of that. I had fallen asleep. Thank you so much. Oh, my Zionism clip was in there. He even played your intro. Score. I'm gonna have to scan through it. And what I was leading to, Max. And by the way, if you're not watching inside Rokfin, everybody, Max is inside the Rokfin chat. I'll hop over and say hi to Rumble as well in just a minute. But Max, it's funny, and thank you for communicating with such facility in this way. What was curious about that was tonight I had big plans to show major segments from Grand Theft World and just go straight. I was going to record segments of them and put them up in my recording system, but they were so big that my CPU was just going to get eaten up, and I was going to have to like store them off. So I'm going to do that tomorrow night, because I can't promote those guys enough. You know, David Knight, Tony Arterburn, Grand Theft World, Kim Iverson, Jimmy Dore. I'm probably Redacted. Who else? Lee Camp. Lee Camp's been doing great stuff. RT's been great. So thanks for the heads up on that, Max. I'm gonna look for that. You made my birthday. Thanks, man. So good. Freethinker 59 says, I got a bit too snarky in Grand Theft World chat last night, but left before midnight and fell asleep. I wish I wasn't really in the chat last night talking, because I was busy working on stuff, getting ready for today. And it was a crazy day yesterday. I did a bunch of MRC TV stuff. So then today I shot video for MRC TV. And then it just basically from Saturday night through all day Sunday into Monday night, until I get the audio pod out for the show on Monday nights. I just basically just write, record, and I did get on the exercise bike yesterday. And I think I've got 2 broken ribs. It was like, well, I think I can do it. Yeah, it was interesting. I wonder how I got those. I don't know. So thanks, Mac. Really appreciate that, Max. Really appreciate it very, very much. Want to hop over to Rumble as well and just say quick hello to everybody there. Lieutenant Oracle of Truth, happy day to see you. And E Pigeon as well. Freegan, AJ says the peace symbol is actually the tree of life inverted, symbolizing the fall of man. He has a comment down there. I know AJ is in the news. And we got a lot of cool people over there as well. So populate any of those chat areas, everybody, and let's get rolling. It's time for us to head on into the news flash.
High-precision, long-range weapons cannot be launched without using space reconnaissance. In addition, the final target choice and the so-called flight mission can only be made by highly qualified specialists based on this technical intelligence.
We don't encourage attacks or enable attacks inside of Russia.
We have conducted airstrikes in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, where tragically we caused civilian casualties. We did the same thing. We have conducted airstrikes in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, where tragically we caused civilian casualties. We did the same thing.
Dr. David Moran, a senior advisor to Dr. Fauci for decades, wrote in an email to Dr. Daszak, quote, I learned from our FOIA lady here how to make emails disappear after I am FOIA'd, but before the search starts. So I think we're all safe. Plus, I deleted most of those earlier emails after sending them to Gmail, end quote. Is that consistent with NIH document retention policies?
It is not.
But this, as director of the NIH, you did sign off on these so-called scientific experiments. And as a dog lover, I want to tell you this is disgusting and evil, what you signed off on, and these experiments that happened to beagles paid for by the American taxpayer. And I want you to know Americans don't pay their taxes for animals to be tortured like this. So the type of science that you are representing, Mr. Fauci, is abhorrent, and it needs to stop. Mr. Fauci, you also represent the type of science where you confess that you made up the COVID rules, including 6 feet social distancing and masking of children.
I never said I made anything up.
You admitted that you made it up. You made it up as you went.
I made it up.
So are you saying this is fake news, Mr. Fauci?
I didn't say I made anything up.
What did you say?
I said that it is not based in science and it just appeared.
But this is science.
What does dogs have to do with anything that we're talking about today?
These are scientific experiments. This is what you signed off on. But you also told the American people they had to distance by 6 feet. They had to wear masks. But let's also talk a little bit further about the type of science that you represent. NIH scientists made $710 million in royalties from drug makers, a fact that's been hidden. Let's talk about the fact about, is it right for scientists and doctors getting paid by the American people, government taxpayer paychecks, to get patents where they're paid millions and hundreds of millions of dollars in royalty fees, especially when the NIH and these government agencies, most powerful agencies in our country, are recommending medical suggestions and advice and making up guidelines like 6 feet distancing and masking of children. Do you think that's appropriate? Do the American people deserve to be abused like that, Mr. Fauci?
You know, our investigation has confirmed that he did indeed lie. He committed a felony. He said that they did not fund, that the NIH did not fund gain-of-function, dangerous research in China. We now know that to be untrue. We know he committed a felony. But what we've discovered now is that there was a massive cover-up from the very beginning. There was a behind-the-scenes effort to change the opinion of people. Many of the Fauci colleagues all believed that the virus did come from the lab. Their opinions were all changed, but then all evidence was then covered up. They began using burner phones. They began using couriers. They said, we can't do things electronically. I can take things by hand to his house. It sounds more like the CIA than the NIH, but it...
Yes? Oh, hello. Hello. We're Mary's parents. Oh, well, come on in, fellas. Hold it a second. Mary's parents burned to death last year. Wait a minute. I know you guys. You're from the news flash.
Yes, my friends. And what will we begin with? What begins the begin, my friends? Of course, we're moving up the story to make it a quick mention about the court case, the mighty court case of the mighty Orion the Hunter. Oh, yes. Hit me with the strike. Dun, 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 dun. I added an extra note. I shouldn't have done that. All right. Let's get to the Hunter Biden excitement. Will he become a libertarian pro-gun hero? Oh, we'll see. All right. First, I want to give you some of the coverage that came to us from The Independent last night. It was actually midday yesterday. So wanted to grab this one for you. Hunter Biden dealt major blow to case on eve of federal gun trial. Sort of like that song by Big Dipper, Remember Easter Eve. Okay. Hunter Biden has been dealt a major blow. This is to the setup to today. They're going to have jury selection and so on today. And wouldn't it be interesting if the jury actually let him off, if he got jury nullification? That would freak his dad out so bad, because his dad hates the concept of natural rights, hates the idea of jury nullification, hates anything that would decentralize and decouple people from the state apparatus that centralizes everything. That would be a really funny thing to see. But according to The Independent, in a historic moment for America, the embattled son of the Presidente is set to go on trial today on charges that he illegally bought a gun in 2018 while in the throes of drug addiction. Yes. And then his very cool girlfriend threw the gun in a trash can. Not bad. Yes, the gun-free school zone idea, big time in their minds. Jury selection will begin on Monday, this morning, in federal court in Delaware, with the trial expected to last 3 to 5 days. And of course, for Hunter Biden, that it could seem like a whole year without his cocaine. Biden has pleaded not guilty to the charges, but Biden already looks set to face an uphill battle. So let's give you some of the context here, shall we? Let's do this on our long distance dedication. I'm Casey Kasem. Let's go with the long distance dedication. Dear Casey, can you give me more details about how this pertains to the 1968 Gun Control Act? Why, sure. Signed, Hunter. You bet, Hunter. You must be Orion the Hunter. I see your belt up there in the sky each night. Keep reaching for the stars. But Biden already looks set to face an uphill battle in the case following a series of 11th hour rulings handed down by El Judge on Sunday night. In the rulings, U.S. District Judge Mary Ellen Noriega blocked Biden's legal team from presenting both a key piece of evidence and testimony from a key expert witness to jurors at his trial. The president's son's defense had planned to show jurors two versions of the federal firearms form that had been filled out by Biden in 2018. His attorneys argued that a second version had been tampered with by the gun store employees in 2021, seeking to cast doubts on the credibility and political bias of the individuals expected to be called as prosecution witnesses. The judge struck down the request to enter the second version as evidence and admonished the defense for pushing conspiratorial theories about the store workers. The judge also sided with the prosecution in its bid to block expert testimony from Dr. Ellie Aoun, a drug addiction expert and clinical psychiatry professor at Columbia University, who would have spoken to the definition and understanding of a user and an addict and how addicts view themselves. The president's son was hit with 3 felony gun charges for breaching the 1968 Gun Control Act in Delaware in September over a gun purchase in October 2018 when he was in the grips of drug addiction. Now, what I don't understand is why didn't he take his dad's advice and just get a shotgun? Isn't that what his dad says? Why in the world get a pistol? I don't get it. He got a revolver. Prosecutors allege that Biden unlawfully possessed a Colt Cobra 38 SPL revolver for 11 days after he falsely claimed on a gun purchase form that he didn't use drugs. Yeah, you see, but later in his autobiography, they discovered that during that whole time, he was a drug addict or drug user. So, according to the 1968 Gun Control Act, that's a no-no. Even though he wasn't in prison and had not been convicted of doing any harm to someone, so he was free, the government said, you're free. No, you can't do that. Ex post facto, they discovered that he possessed the gun while he was a drug addict, according to his own sworn testimony on the sheet. So, right now, it looks like Hunter Biden is likely to be found guilty. How it's going to play out regarding sentencing is anybody's guess. Probably nothing particularly bad, I don't think. However, and of course, Joe can always pardon him, can't he? However, this could have a bearing on how at least a few Democrats hear about, maybe not how they decide on, but how they hear about the 1968 Gun Control Act, which has been around. It was the major revision to the 1934 introduction of the Firearms Act under FDR, which was an abysmally terrible attack through the tax code on certain types of guns. And then they opened it up further with the 1968 so-called Gun Control Act to then move beyond trying to prohibit people from buying guns by making them so expensive through taxes and actually restricting the ability of certain people to get firearms. For example, under the 68 Gun Control Act, they prohibited convicted felons who had been released, and they prohibited drug users. Okay? So it seems pretty clear that Hunter Biden ran afoul of the 68 Gun Control Act. The question is whether or not a few people in their, observing of this will recognize A, the immorality of the 1968 Gun Control Act, B, the illogic of it, which is if somebody is deemed safe enough to be on the streets, then why can't they exercise their rights, which pertains to anybody who's released from prison? Again, if they're not safe enough to hold a firearm, why are you letting them out of prison? That shows us that the prison system doesn't seem to work too well, does it? But you got to have the government do it because it's for your protection. Don't question the questions. Shh, you didn't see anything in the statist mindset. There's no problem at all. Everything fits together fine. It's fine. Tracy Bonham said so. Everything's fine. Everything makes sense. So that is a little bit from the Independent. Now, this comes to us from 5 this morning at Politico. And this was the version that I believe it was Ron Paul's team, Ron Paul and Daniel McAdams referred to on the Ron Paul Liberty Report today. Hunter Biden's gun trial starts today. Here's what to know, they say. Okay. Hunter Biden, so on and so forth. He's all excited. He's got a reassuring grin, so on and so forth. Hunter Biden has drawn scrutiny for his links to controversial Ukrainian, Chinese, Romanian business ventures. Yes, no kidding. Who's Hunter? He graduated Yale Law School. Obviously was great material for Yale. Oh, yeah, you know it. It probably just must have been top of his class, just like his dad claimed when his father went to the school of hard knocks, right? And then we've got all these other sorts of exciting things. So here it is. In late 2018, as Biden was in the throes of addiction, and of course, that didn't last at all. He's not still an addict. No way. A criminal investigator at the IRS started investigating him. Good thing for that IRS, huh? Got to get more of those agents going. IRS agents scrutinized his profligate lifestyle and unusual finances. That was in 2018. Within months, the FBI was also investigating him. Investigators took a broad look at Biden's life. It was clear he had a drug problem. They also found evidence indicating he had bought a gun. On December 9, 2020, just weeks after his father defeated Donald Trump, wink, wink, defeated, in the presidential race, he confirmed publicly that his tax affairs were under investigation. How about other affairs? 2.5 years later, Biden's criminal jeopardy appeared to be nearing an end. On June 20th, 2023, his lawyers announced that they had reached a plea deal. That was fun, wasn't it? That was a great day. To end the probe, Biden would plead guilty to tax violations and enter a diversion agreement intended to result in the eventual withdrawal of a gun charge from, of course, violating the 68 statute. In exchange, the Justice Department, wink, wink, justice, would not prosecute him for other crimes, and Biden would be able to avoid any prison time. Republicans called it a sweetheart deal. Yeah, no kidding. It didn't last. A month later, Biden and the prosecutors appeared in the Wilmington courthouse for a hearing they hoped would lock in the deal. But instead, Judge Mary Ellen Noriega, a Trump appointee, grilled prosecutors and the defense about the deal's structure, enforcement, and immunity protection. That was key. Instead of greenlighting the agreement, she sent both parties back to the negotiating table to clarify its language. Those efforts failed. On August 11th, Attorney General Merrick Garland made David Weiss, the Trump-appointed U.S. Attorney for Delaware supervising the probe, a special counsel. That designation gave Weiss greater independence to charge Biden anywhere in the country. On September 14th, Weiss's team charged Biden with 3 crimes. 1, unlawfully possessing a gun as a drug user. 2, lying on a federal form when he bought the gun and making a false statement about information required to be collected by a federal licensing dealer. Those were 2 and 3, sorry. So 2, lying on the federal form, and 3, making a false statement about information required to be collected by a federally licensed gun dealer. 3 months later, the special counsel brought a separate criminal case in Los Angeles charging Biden with tax crimes. That case is scheduled to go to trial in September. All right, so there you go. That's the Hunter Biden thing. I hope you found that interesting. It's who knows? I just don't know where it's going to go. And we'll talk tomorrow night a little more in depth about the Trump ruling from last week, the Trump decision last week from the jury. But right now, I want to turn to another theme, and I want to turn to the possible legal ramifications for our friend, the fiery, feisty, feral Anthony Fauci. And for that, we need a theme. And why not go with the guys who predicted years before it happened that there would be a release of a virus. As they said in The Great Cull, they said, develop virus, market cure, exploit the panic. That was about, I think, 7 or 8 years before the COVID panic. Let's turn to the song I Am the Virus from Killing Joke. Yes, folks, years before the pandemic, so-called. Yes, do it, Killing Joke. I like this song so much. Everybody has found this song pretty much after the fact. Yes, folks, the big story, it is, of course, Anthony Fauci appearing on Capitol Hill. Let's get right to it, everybody. Our first touch onto this comes to us via Kim.com. As he writes, the fall of Fauci, COVID-19 is officially exposed as a U.S. government project, a virus engineered by U.S. scientists using a biolab in China for cover. The biggest crime against humanity, killed more victims than the Nazi Holocaust against the Jews. Demand justice. So, well stated. Going to give you some of the opening right here from Ronnie Jackson of Texas. He's a doctor.
Yeah, you can be removed. Actually, you're not allowed to speak.
Your time has
Take your
expired.
Starbucks with you.
Mr. Garcia, Mr. Raskin, you're out of line. Your times have expired. I now recognize Dr. Jackson from Texas for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Fauci, I have to say, I, as so many Americans, am deeply disappointed in your actions during a critical time in our nation's history while you were in key leadership roles as the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease and as the chief medical advisor to President Biden.
Okay, now let's just stop right there, everybody. As you noted, he does not mention anywhere there Donald Trump. I know, it's shocking. It must be truly shocking. He doesn't mention Donald Trump, and he also doesn't mention the U.S. Constitution, which wouldn't allow for NIAID or the NIH or any viral research to exist at all. I want to get that out there right at the start, because all of this argumentation is worthwhile. A lot of the points are valid, but they, as you saw on my billboard for the show, and we'll look at it again, they're missing something. They're pressing on what? Yes, they're pressing on Anthony Fauci, on contradictions. They're pressing on secret emails. They're pressing on new information that's coming out that indicate that Anthony Fauci perjured himself multiple times, as we know, but they are not focusing on their own sworn responsibility to protect and defend their U.S. Constitution. They're going along to get along, and they're saying, well, under the system that we expected, you shouldn't have been doing X, Y, or Z. Well, how can they claim that they expected that system to operate that way when they themselves are not operating constitutionally? What rational person can say, we are just disgusted with the way that you behaved in this already corrupt system that we have set up? Seriously. So they're just going deeper into it to say, well, we had these expectations for our corrupt system. Let's go further into what I thought was a very good exchange, and this is going to be a big one. that you saw a little bit of earlier. This is Marjorie Taylor Greene slamming, absolutely slamming Anthony Fauci. We'll give you this in a couple segments. I've got a couple other things just to remind us of some of the history of what was going on with Donald Trump when they started things off. And it got worse, of course, under Joe Biden. But we're talking the medical emergency on March 13th, 2020. We're talking the canards about masking, and all of that stuff contributed to us getting shut down on MRC TV. You probably were getting your voice silenced at social media. That was bad enough, but it gets worse because, of course, many of these things gave false senses of protection to people. They gave special benefits to the drug manufacturers. They led to people being put into nursing homes and other areas where they shouldn't have been, and they made older people sick. They completely flipped over the very concept of how to handle a so-called pandemic. They lied to us about whether it was actually a pandemic, and it really wasn't. They lied to us about the death statistics. They gave us faulty PCR tests to support their aberrant, errant claims. And they went through all these things, not once acknowledging the fact that behind the scenes, people like Fauci were communicating with his team to say, how can we protect ourselves? How can we cover this up? And by the way, we're going to parse things when anybody asks us questions about things like, gain of function. We're just going to say that it's not gain of function, even though it actually is. We're going to say after the fact that, the 6 foot distancing and masking, that just popped up out of nowhere. But even though we were aware of the fact that it came out of nowhere, we let it go through. Watch how Fauci tries to protect himself here as Marjorie Taylor Greene actually drills into the guy.
Advisor, but he is not an advisor on policy.
That's very confusing to have someone's title and not having that to be their obligation.
But that is the fact, though.
I think that supports what we said. There needs to be more oversight and there needs to be more accountability. Mr. Chairman, my time has expired, but these points are very clear to all of us today in this hearing room. I yield back.
I now recognize Mr. Garcia from California for 5 minutes. Oh, he left? I now recognize Ms. Green from Georgia for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fauci, you were quoted on CBS Face the Nation saying it's easy to criticize, but they're really criticizing science because I represent science. Do you represent science, Mr. Fauci?
I am a scientist who uses the scientific method to gain information.
Yes, you said you represent science. Do you represent science, Mr. Fauci? Yes or no? Yes or no?
No, that's not a yes or no answer.
Yes, it's a yes or no.
I don't think it is.
Okay, well, we'll take that as you don't know what you represent.
I didn't hear what you
6
said.
feet social distancing and masking of children.
I never said I made anything up.
You admitted that you made it up. You
I
made it
didn't
up as
say
you went.
I made it up.
So are you saying this is fake news, Mr. Fauci?
I didn't say I made anything up.
What did you say?
I said that it is not based in science and it just appeared.
So let's just talk about that. He claims that he got the information from the CDC. So are we to take it that this man who got this information claims that he got this information, it just appeared from the CDC? Was he aware that it just appeared from the CDC at the time? Because that doesn't give one a lot of faith in the man's judgment to say, I'm just going to take whatever the CDC says, even though I'm a scientist and I'm keeping track of all these things. And now I'm going to promote the same idea very vociferously, despite the fact, of course, that he says otherwise in emails. Now, there's another point that Marjorie Taylor Greene brings up, and I think it's a good point about the torture of those dogs. She says Americans don't pay taxes to do this. But, on a philosophical level, what if they did? Would it make it any more moral? What if the majority of taxpayers said, oh, yeah, it's perfectly fine to torture dogs? How about this? What if the majority of Americans said, oh, yeah, it's perfectly fine to send weapons over to Israel and have Nikki Haley sign every one of them? Would that make it moral? No. Right? So her statement, I understand the sentiment of her statement, but from a philosophical point, we can actually derive a lesson from that, which is morality is not based on majority sanction or what the government thinks people want. Morality is based on higher laws. That's the point. That's why we're all given free will. That's why the state getting in the way of our free will actually disconnects us from God. That's one of the reasons I'm an anarchist. We'll get back to this, though. Let's continue.
This is science.
What does dogs have to do with anything that we're talking about today?
These are scientific experiments. This is what you signed off on. But you also told the American people they had to distance by 6 feet. They had to wear masks. But let's also talk a little bit further about the type of science that you represent. NIH scientists made $710 million in royalties from drug makers, a fact that's been hidden. Let's talk about the fact about, is it right for scientists and doctors getting paid by the American people, government taxpayer paychecks to get patents where they're paid millions and hundreds of millions of dollars in royalty fees, especially when the NIH and these government agencies, most powerful agencies in our country, are recommending medical suggestions and advice and making up guidelines like 6 feet distancing and masking of children. Do you think that's appropriate? Do the American people deserve to be abused like that, Mr. Fauci? Because you're not doctor. You're Mr. Fauci in my few minutes. No, I don't need your answer. I want to talk about this right here.
Mr. Chairman,
Fauci,
objection.
I reclaim my time. I reclaim my time, Mr. Raskin.
Gentlelady will suspend.
Mr. Chairman,
Point of order.
Just in terms of the rules of decorum, are we allowed to deny that a doctor is a doctor just because we don't want him to be a doctor?
Yes, because in my time.
Well, maybe she just she just identifies as a person who thinks that even though he has the doctorate, she thinks he's not a doctor. How can they possibly, if they're funding all these things in schools that allow kids to identify any way they want, and they're funding inside the U.S. government now, they have a policy that people have to accept pronouns based on what the customers want when they walk into their businesses, then certainly Anthony Fauci should have to accept that Marjorie Taylor Greene doesn't think he's a doctor. And nobody in Congress who supported all the pronoun stuff for the LGBTQ and trans identity stuff to force it on businesses through the federal government's so-called regulatory power over businesses, which is massively unconstitutional and more deeply immoral. If they're going to impose that on businesses, just like they did in Canada, well, then certainly I think she should be able to do that. She should be able to claim that he's an elephant or a donkey, anything she wants to do. They can't have rules on that because that, of course, would be discriminatory against her. She identifies as a person who can call doctors not doctors.
That man does not deserve to have a license. As a matter of fact, it should be revoked and he belongs in prison.
Suspend. The gentlelady should recognize the doctor as a doctor.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, is this what we have become? Is this what we have devolved into? No decorum.
You know what? We can do that hearing about the poor men that were injected with syphilis because I support you in that. That's horrific. And this government that does things like that to Americans doesn't have decorum to the American people.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentlemen.
So they're talking, of course, about the syphilis experiments many, many years ago where nobody was given informed consent. I think you get the drift on that. Let's continue. They're going to have some more hearings on that to make themselves look good, but they're not going to pay attention to the fact that Fauci promoted getting billions of people jabbed without their consent.
Is out of point of regular order, please.
The gentleman is out of order.
Decorum.
I recognize the point of order. Go ahead with your point of order.
You got it.
No, I mean, I was going to say what Representative Raskin said. That's completely unacceptable to be able to deny Dr. Fauci who's here, a respected member of the medical community, his title, and that's actually a personal attack on his character.
And I have instructed her.
He's not respected.
And I've instructed her to address him as doctor.
I'm not
Gentlelady
addressing
shall
him as
continue.
doctor. Let's talk about
Mr.
this.
Chairman,
I'm
would
reclaiming
move that
my
the woman-
time. I'm reclaiming my time.
Words get taken
I'm
down.
reclaiming my time.
Second that.
Point of order.
Suspend. A member can only move to have words. I'm sorry. The issues we are debating are important ones that members feel deeply about. And while vigorous disagreement is part of the legislative process, as I said at the beginning, members are reminded that we must adhere to established standards of decorum in debate. This is a reminder that it is a violation of House rules and the rules of this committee to engage in personalities regarding other members or to question the motives of a colleague. Remarks of that type are not permitted by the rules and are not in keeping with the best traditions of our committee.
Kind of
The chair
reminds
will
me.
enforce these rules.
Makes me think. I wish I had the cut from Dr. Strangelove. Gentlemen, no fighting in the war room. You need decorum in the place where they, operate through seizure of people's money and theft and fund wars all around the world. But we got to have decorum here.
Of decorum at all times and urges all members to be mindful of their remarks. Does the gentleman from California have anything further?
We should have to take her words down.
Yeah, I made it. I offered that her words be taken down, Mr. Chair. Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a point of order.
Mr.
Because
Griffin
they
is
accused us
Mr.
of
Griffin is
worshiping
Gentlelady
President Trump. We
Gentlelady-
don't worship President Trump.
Gentlelady will suspend. Mr. Griffin, you have a point of order.
Mr. Chairman, while it may not be polite, I believe the rule only applies to members of this body, the Senate, and the President of the United States. I do not believe that it applies. The rule on taking down words does not apply to a witness. Again, I'm not condoning the words. I'm just relating or asking whether or not it applies to individuals who are just happen to be here in front of us.
I agree. The chair overrules the point of order by the gentleman from Maryland, but ask that members please afford all other members the respect they're entitled, refrain from using rhetoric that could be construed as an attack on the motives or character of another member or the witness. You may proceed.
Thank you. This was a time in history where you got to throw out the first pitch at the Washington Nationals baseball game while Americans were forced to stay home and watch such events that they love from at home alone on their televisions. And what a hypocrisy this picture shows. Here you are without your mask, with empty seats everywhere. Remember the cardboard cutout fans? That was one of the most insulting things to Americans, having to watch the games from home where you got to go and enjoy the game and sit right next to people, not following the 6 feet of distancing, not wearing your mask, and everyone else was forced to stay home and stop enjoying life. And your science here, your science is displayed perfectly in this picture where children in school were put in plastic bubbles because of your science, your repulsive, evil science. And let's go back to your very own email. You said earlier you don't use email. Oh, you do. Right here. This is your own email where you said the typical mask you buy in the drugstore is not really effective in keeping out virus. I do not recommend that you wear a mask. This is your email. This is your own words. But yet children all over America were forced to wear masks. Healthy children forced to wear masks, muzzled in their schools. And then they were forced to learn from home because of your so-called science and your medical suggestions, while you and all your cronies get paid from Big Pharma. You know that what this committee should be doing? We should be recommending you to be prosecuted. We should be writing a criminal referral because you should be prosecuted for crimes against humanity. You belong in prison, Dr. Fauci.
Mr. Chairman.
So Very powerful, very intense back and forth, obviously, exposing how they want to afford a certain amount of respect for each other, but actually in the rules, they don't have to afford respect to the witnesses. The chairman was sort of adding that in there. So they don't have to afford that respect according to the rules they were reading over. He was actually reading in and added something. You could tell he was doing that. And yes, they finally said, okay, she can call him what she wants, but we won't take down the words of her, but please afford respect for the witness. But what I think is fascinating is you can see the entire lineage of this thing stops at a certain point. So she's upset about the policy recommendations. She's not upset about the federal government handing out the money to the states for the schools, then for the roads, for the medical systems, all these reimbursements, all this stuff. She's not bringing up that stuff. And perhaps she doesn't have enough time, but for a person who swears an oath to the Constitution, again, it might sound to some people as being pedantic or in some way dry, but they're the ones who are there under the Constitution's parameters. That's how they get their salary. So when she's upset about Anthony Fauci and his disparate signals, private and public, I would enjoy it if she would bring up the dangerous fact that would remain whether he was there or somebody else was there, which is whoever is in these slots that are created unconstitutionally and immorally, taking somebody's money for these reasons, for the viral research, the handout of the grants, the skirting of the so-called temporary ban, then they fund it through EcoHealth Alliance, right? They've got the proposals. If I can get into PubMed in late January, early February of 2020 and find a study from 2005 that says chloroquine as potent mediator for SARS-CoV or coronavirus, SARS-CoV-1. If I can do that in a tenth of a second after hearing something on the radio about hydroxychloroquine, then clearly Anthony Fauci could do some research about the things he's purporting. Clearly, these people could do some research about whether or not all this information is easy to understand and know right from the start. The EcoHealth Alliance stuff, you just do some research. You can find the information. And they could have grilled this guy on this stuff long ago. The mask stuff, logic and research, prior studies in other countries already show that the masks wouldn't work against viral particles that big. The PCR tests, people who understood what the creator of the PCR test said, knew that it could be manipulated. The term pandemic, anybody who did a tenth of a research on the term pandemic so they would know what they were talking about would discover, they changed the definition so they could allow a weaker virus to sound like it was much more dangerous in 2009. All this stuff. But all of those things are just accoutrements onto an already corrupt system that has to be addressed. And they're the ones who swear the oath to be the protectors of it, not me. I'm not the one. They're the ones. So I don't want to slam Marjorie Taylor Greene, but it would have been, she was very powerful there. She got a little bit off the cuff and I think, a little bit petulant, calling him Mr. and so on. It's a little childish, but she made some very good points in many other ways. Now, I want to bring back some memories, okay? First, let's look at some of the contemporary information from Glenn Greenwald. Glenn Greenwald on X wrote about an exchange between Jim Jordan and Anthony Fauci. He says, this exchange alone proves what a pathological liar Fauci is. 1 week after receiving emails, remember there was the Fauci email scandal. They were finally released. I wrote many articles about that for MRC TV. 1 week after receiving emails from top epidemiologists arguing the virus was likely a lab leak, Fauci caused a virtual ban on questioning COVID's origin. But he's a liberal folk hero, so only the GOP can raise this question. So here is Jim Jordan, and here we go.
Do you agree that there was a push to downplay the lab leak theory?
Not on my part.
Really?
Really?
Wow.
Wow.
I think most of the country would find that amazing. I still got 11 seconds.
Well, look at the facts. I've kept an open mind throughout the entire process.
All right, I yield back. Do you agree that there was a push
look at the
to
facts?
downplay
I've kept
the
an
lab
open
leak
mind.
theory?
So then you look at what he was doing behind the scenes, as he was communicating with people. Remember, right after the folks at the Great Barrington Declaration, that's Great Barrington, Massachusetts, just about an hour and so away from here. I passed by the building of American Institute for Economic Research. That's where they did it. Jay Bhattacharya, they've got their Supreme Court case. It's being heard. It's already been heard. They're adjudicating on it now. They'll probably have the decision this week or next week on it. That's the Murthy v. Missouri decision regarding the United States government under Trump and under Biden trying to leverage their power and their so-called regulatory power, which is unconstitutional, over social media and the internet to get social media to shadow ban us, to suppress our word about things, to suppress the word of the people who had signed the Great Barrington Declaration that said, you're not going to get to any reassurance of endemic status through the vaccinations that you're claiming. You've got to do it naturally by allowing healthy people who have good immune systems to get sick, acquire natural immunity, and then those people will have long-term real natural immunity, and you can count on it. You can't count on whether or not the vaccines are going to do it. And then you're setting people up for failure because you're mixing older people and younger people, older, riskier people in the same population. They were right at the American Institute for Economic Research and the Great Barrington Declaration. And Anthony Fauci, right after they did that weekend, he was in touch with people at NIAID and NIH saying, we've got to do something to counter this in emails. People discovered it. Why didn't he discuss that? Here's another question. As I brought up right at the start in February, why didn't Anthony Fauci bring up the fact that that 2005 study that I discovered in a tenth of a second by Googling it when I first heard about hydroxychloroquine in late January, early February of 2020, why didn't he mention that NIAID had funded the study and that hydroxychloroquine had already been proven in a study he helped fund that it was a potent mediator for the inflammatory cytokine response for SARS? Why didn't he mention it? Of course he didn't mention it. Did he mention the fact that many of the plants that create hydroxychloroquine throughout the world burned between late 2013 and early 2014? Remember that? No, he didn't mention any of that stuff. Didn't mention it at all. Instead, what do you get? You get big pushes from big pharmaceutical companies because hydroxychloroquine comes in a generic form and it's about 10 cents a tablet. That's what you get. Let's remember a little bit more. We're going to go with Matt Ridley here, and then we'll show a couple videos. Matt Ridley, ultimately, a never-before-seen SARS-like virus with a newly introduced furin cleavage site matching the description in the Wuhan Institute's diffuse proposal, caused an outbreak in Wuhan less than 2 years after the proposal was drafted. Now, for more information on that, let's go over to this. This is from Newsweek from 2021. October 8th, 2021, Wuhan, U.S. scientists plan to make coronaviruses, documents leaked by drastic show. This will tell you what this special program is that he just mentioned. Scientists in the U.S. and China planned to create coronavirus genomes in order to study them, leaked documents show, according to experts who spoke to Newsweek. The plan was outlined in a proposal by the U.S. research organization EcoHealth Alliance, where they shifted the money as they moved things from University of North Carolina over to Wuhan during the so-called Obama ban. But I think Obama was well aware of it. I think they knew that the money was going to be redirected through a third party, EcoHealth. EcoHealth got the money from NIH. EcoHealth then funded the research. To the U.S. Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, DARPA. It was in a proposal from EcoHealth, and it was leaked in September by a group of online researchers. That's September 2021, and correspondents known as the Decentralized Radical Autonomous Search Team investigating COVID-19. Drastic. The documents could not be verified by Newsweek. EcoHealth Alliance has been under scrutiny in recent months, 2021, due to its work with the Wuhan Institute of Virology, a facility in the Chinese city of Wuhan that was the original epicenter of the COVID pandemic, where researchers study bat viruses. Some This research has placed it at the center of COVID lab leak theories. Newsweek has previously reported on how drastic uncovered details about research at the Wuhan Institute and how EcoHealth Alliance funneled U.S. government money to the lab. The proposal for a project called Diffuse details how scientists from EcoHealth Alliance and the Wuhan Institute of Virology wanted to study the threat of bat-borne coronaviruses by sequencing samples from cave bats, reverse engineering those samples to produce viruses, and then inserting these into mice to see what would happen in order to prepare for possible human outbreaks. Coronaviruses are made up of RNA strands and so on and so forth. One section of the proposal details how researchers wanted to sequence data, quote, from a panel of closely related coronavirus strains, compare the genomes, and scan for errors. It went on. Consensus candidate genomes will be synthesized commercially using established techniques in genome-length RNA and electroportation to recover recombinant viruses. So, that, now going back to Matt Ridley, will reiterate, he says, ultimately, a never-before-seen SARS-like virus with a newly introduced furin cleavage site matching the description in the Wuhan Institute's Diffuse proposal from 2018 caused an outbreak in Wuhan less than 2 years after the proposal was drafted. When the Wuhan scientists, that's before it was actually accepted, so it was drafted earlier than 2018, earlier than the fall of 2018. When the Wuhan scientists published their seminal paper about COVID-19 as the pandemic roared to life in 2020, they did not mention the virus's furin cleavage site, a feature they should have been on the lookout for, according to their own grant proposal, and a feature quickly recognized by other scientists. Worse still, as the pandemic raged, their American collaborators failed to publicly reveal the existence of the Diffuse proposal. The president of EcoHealth, Peter Daszak, recently admitted to Congress that he doesn't know about virus samples collected by the Wuhan Institute after 2015 and never asked the lab scientists if they had started the work described in Diffuse. In May, citing failures of EcoHealth's monitoring of risky experiments conducted in the Wuhan lab, the Biden administration suspended all federal funding for the organization and Mr. Daszak and initiated proceedings to bar them from receiving future grants. Now, to wrap this up, just want to mention Anthony Fauci was well aware of the fact that when Nature put forward a study, they had a study that the government funded and published it through Nature on the sources of the Wuhan lab virus. They said, oh, it was natural. But the people they had looking into it were people like Peter Daszak and the EcoHealth Alliance team. They were looking into their own work, absolving themselves. It's absolutely amazing. It's just stunning stuff. And it leads to now, as things are starting to fall apart, in Japan, already politicians are starting to apologize. Here's more. Japanese leader apologizes to the unvaccinated. You were right. Vaccines are killing millions of our loved ones. Kazuhiro Karajuki, former Japanese Minister for Internal Affairs, has become the first major politician to apologize to the unvaccinated for the tsunami of deaths. And there it is, blown up for you, just like Marjorie Taylor Greene's anger. But there's more. Let's go back to the video that we presented. I want to give you this longer extended piece from Fox News as Maria Bartiromo and Rand Paul chat. Sorry about that. Hold on. Here we go.
So Dr. Fauci is going to be testifying tomorrow. What are you expecting?
You know, our investigation has confirmed that he did indeed lie. He committed a felony. He said that they did not fund, that the NIH did not fund gain-of-function, dangerous research in China. We now know that to be untrue. We know he committed a felony. But what we've discovered now is that there was a massive cover-up from the very beginning. There was a behind-the-scenes effort to change the opinion of people. Many of the Fauci colleagues all believed that the virus did come from the lab. Their opinions were all changed, but then all evidence was then covered up. They began using burner phones. They began using couriers. They said, we can't do things electronically. I can take things by hand to his house. It sounds more like the CIA than the NIH, but it's unbelievable the amount of things that went on. They say, oh, we're safe now. I've deleted all those emails. I think we're safe now. What in the world would they actually mean by we think we're safe now? So there was a massive cover up, and there's so many people that need to be interviewed. In addition to Fauci, we have David Morenz, who worked for him for 20 years. We have the FOIA lady, the woman at the IT woman at NIH, who was explaining to them how to avoid FOIA and how to break the law. She needs to be deposed. There's all kinds of stones that could be unturned, but ultimately the buck stops with Anthony Fauci, who's in charge of the place, and he has the responsibility not only for the cover-up, but also responsibility for letting dangerous research go on that led to a pandemic, in all likelihood led to a pandemic that killed millions of people.
But I mean, think about that. President Trump is in charge. He finds out about this COVID pandemic coming, that this disease is about to kill all these people. He's got his team right there. He asks, what do you think this is? Dr. Fauci knew all along that they were doing this gain of function research, and he says, oh, well, I think it's natural. I mean, really?
Well, see, we now have his emails, contemporaneous emails from the exact time when he was saying it was natural, nothing to see here, and that the NIH had nothing to do with it. We have the private emails where he and everyone in his inner circle was saying, oh my goodness, we've looked at the genetic sequence and it looks to be manipulated. It looks to be a creation of a lab. And then they do the opposite. And it's even more nefarious than that. A few weeks later, Anthony Fauci gets up in the White House on the podium and he quotes a scientific paper to prove that scientists believe this came from nature. But he didn't tell people that he commissioned and edited the paper. He was behind the origins of the paper. And so there's so much dishonesty going on here and so much abuse of power. We've got to get to the bottom of this, and mainly because...
And of course, as I mentioned, just to reiterate, that was the one where he knowingly put forward that people like Daszak lead up the investigation of what Daszak was doing. It's so maddeningly corrupt, as you know. Couple more beats on this just to make sure we drive this home on this first start. And this is a very, very big thing. This is massive. What I think is going to happen is I think they're going to make Morenz the fall guy. I think in every way possible, Fauci's going to claim ignorance of what Morenz was doing in hiding the information. But if they can get some connection to a private email or a burner phone or something like that on the part of Fauci, and they want to get Fauci's private emails because he's claiming he never did any business for NIAID, any government business through his private emails. If they can get something where it was delivered to him by courier or some physical evidence that shows he received something that's part of that circle that Morenz has already been exposed as having been part of. If Fauci can be exposed for that, whether he was directing it or not, he's already been proven to have perjured himself about gain of function, and he's just trying to parse it, saying, well, we don't see what gain of function the same way, we don't define it the same way. He's already perjured himself that way. He clearly understood what Rand Paul was asking him 2 years ago about gain of function, and there's more. There's much more. Here we go.
This research still goes on. It goes on in the United States, and it needs to be regulated. I have a bill coming forward that I hope will be bipartisan that will have an independent agency that oversees all of this dangerous research.
And there's the problem right there. Again, you got to stress this thing. Why are you doing that, Rand? For goodness sake, you've got strengths upon strengths there. You're calling up all this information. You're exposing these people for their nefarious activities and their lies. And then you come out and say, well, we want to reshuffle the decks on the Titanic. We want to make sure that there's an overseer for this type of research. This type of research is not constitutional, Rand. That's the point. If you swear an oath to the Constitution, there's only one way that you could possibly make this sound valid, and it would have to come after a declaration of war. This is what we're talking about. And of course, this was done through the DoD. This is how they develop these things. You could hypothetically claim that even though on the civic level, on the civilian level, the federal government has no power constitutionally to develop viruses or cures for viruses or do research for diseases like Alzheimer's or any of that stuff, to send men to the moon or whatever. If they can get it under the auspices of defense, they try to get away with those things. That's how they did the interstate highway thing. That's originally how they started to do moonshots and satellites and all that stuff. It was always under national defense, right? Now, under the founders' original conception, national defense was supposed to be handled on the state level with the militia. If there was a declaration of war, the president could lead the militia, or if a state requested assistance to protect its constitutional system of government, they could approach Congress through the legislature of that state, or the governor could do it if the legislature was away. And then the militias from the other states, militia members, could volunteer and they could go down and help in that state. That's it. So unless you've got a declaration of war, there's not supposed to be any standing army. And hence, there's not supposed to be any standing support structure for that standing army, right? It's supposed to be done on the state level. Now, this might sound archaic, but this is the way the founders developed it. And they haven't amended the Constitution. There's no word National Guard. There's no Army of the United States that's a standing army. They do allow for the Navy, but all the rest of it is supposed to be the militia. Right? That's us, the body of the people who are able to carry guns. So this is a real important point. Some people might think it's esoteric, but as Sasha Larapova has pointed out, and I was speculating the same thing, she actually was doing this research months before I started to speculate about it, and I didn't know about it. I was just thinking things through as far as the Constitution goes and what it requires. I said the only way that they can develop these viral research facilities is if they did it not through constitutionally, not through claims of we're helping science, we're going to stop viruses, because viruses for people are just natural things. The federal government's not supposed to be there to stop you from being at risk against natural things, right? But if they could claim that a foreign government developed it as a weapon and set it off against Americans, then they could claim it's for national defense. Okay, it's a stretch because, again, there's no declaration of war. But this is, and in fact, as Sasha Larapova pointed out, we brought this up last year, her research was a revelation for me because it confirmed pretty much everything I'd been speculating. That is the way they did it. That's the way they did it for all the Operation Warp Speed stuff. That's why it was distributed through the military. Okay, so technically speaking, under the Constitution, doing viral research could only very thinly be argued to be allowable if it's for defense, national defense against something, right? And this is what they do. They try to say, well, what would these foreign governments do? And then they end up developing these deadly diseases, right? The U.S. government does it. But the key thing is that technically speaking, under the Constitution, they actually wouldn't be able to do that unless there was a declaration of war. Because without a declaration of war, the readiness for the military and all the preparations and all the training and stuff, that's not supposed to be left up to the central government. It's up to the states. Again, it sounds esoteric, but it's solid. This is solid scholarship. If you look at the history of the United States, this fits with what the militia originally was. And of course, I think a lot of people who are devotees or supporters of the Second Amendment are aware of this. They are aware of what the original concept of the militia was. And then as you start to think it through, you say to yourself, oh, you know what? That syllogism makes a lot of sense. There's no standing army. The militia was supposed to be an operative only within the states until they get called up for a declaration of war. So the rest of it, all the preparation, the guns, all those types of things are supposed to be left up to the states. Now, some of the other fine details about, what about cannons and other firearms and things like that for the national defense? Can't they store those things? Wouldn't that be similar to fighting against this? Wouldn't the federal government have a role for that? Yeah, I think that the founders didn't specify sufficiently how to handle that sort of thing without a declaration of war. Because again, without a declaration of war, that's all supposed to be in the hands of the governors, right? So again, they had an amendment process in there, and if people want to conform to the U.S. Constitution and be honest about it, especially those politicians, I wish that they would do it that way. And as Rand Paul pointed out, however, again, one of the key things here is at least they are bringing up these inconsistencies from Fauci. At least people are getting some satisfaction about that, but they're not addressing the core of the problem, which is that the United States government shouldn't be doing this type of viral research. And if they're going to do it under the auspices of the Department of Defense, I would like to see I'm an anarchist again, but I would like to see those people who swear their oaths to the Constitution at least provide for me a constitutional argument for their actions, so I won't think that they're such massive hypocrites. So there's more. I want to give you this one. This comes from Comer, who's the chairman of the Oversight Committee, as he addresses Fauci.
Dr. David Moran, a senior advisor to Dr. Fauci for decades, wrote in an email to Dr. Daszak, quote, I learned from our FOIA lady here how to make emails disappear after I am FOIA'd, but before the search starts. So I think we're all safe. Plus, I deleted most of those earlier emails after sending them to Gmail, end quote. Is that consistent with NIH document retention policies?
It is not.
Yes, it is not. Remember that? Oh, I remember that very well. Sorry, I thought that was the one with Fauci, but we'll get to that a little bit more. Now I want to give you some material from the New York Times via Lee Camp, who did a great job. You can see the headline for his program. This is Dangerous Ideas with Lee Camp. You can find it on Rumble. He's been doing a fantastic job on things like this, on things like the slaughter of Gazan, of Palestinians in Gaza, on the Ukraine, megalomaniacal mania for war among NATO members and the United States. And so here he is, just a quick bit about a recent stunner from the New York Times. All of a sudden, they're absolutely shocked that, wow, it's true about COVID. It seems like it was developed in a lab. How shocking.
The Wuhan lab pursued this type of work under low biosafety conditions that could not have contained an airborne virus as infections as SARS-CoV-2. So low security. Scientists on Dr. Xi's team fell ill with COVID-like symptoms in fall 2019. One of the scientists had been named in the diffused proposal as the person in charge of the virus discovery work. The scientist denied having been sick. The hypothesis that COVID-19 came from an animal at the seafood market in Wuhan is not supported by any evidence. Despite the intense search trained on the animal trade and people linked to the market, investigators have not reported finding any animals infected with SARS-CoV-2 that had not been infected by humans. And again, that particular gain of function had only just recently come about. So if this was spreading through animals, you would have expected that gain of function to be far older. Anyway.
Awesome stuff. Great stuff. Lee Camp, good job. Excellent stuff. And finally, to sort of wrap this up, let me give you a couple other quick items. Let's just remember a couple of these things real quick. Camus says this. The results. A major new study has just confirmed that COVID mRNA shots are a sole cause of the soaring cases of heart failure among children. However, a new large-scale study, it shouldn't even be however, you'll see what I mean. I think he sort of misplaced this. A new large-scale study from renowned scientists at the prestigious University of Oxford, so he's really talking about the same thing here, it's this study, has just confirmed that myocarditis and pericarditis only appear in children and adolescents after COVID vaccination and not after infection from the virus. The new study looked at the official government data of more than 1 million English children and adolescents aged between 5 and 11 and 12 and 15. The study compared vaccinated and unvaccinated subjects. The researchers also took into account the number of doses of vaccine received. In detailing their findings, the researchers wrote, quote, all myocarditis and pericarditis events during the study period occurred in vaccinated individuals. These are kids between 5 and 11 and 12 and 15. The study also noted that hospitalization related to COVID-19 was extremely rare. No kidding. We've been reporting on that at MRC TV, and they shut us down on YouTube because of one of those reports 2 years ago, 3 years ago now, among children and adolescents. The English data show that myocarditis and pericarditis were only recorded in vaccinated children and adolescents. The vast majority of myocarditis and pericarditis cases occurred after the first dose of the vaccine, the study found. Over half of the adolescents who suffered from the conditions visited the hospital as a result. This news follows another recent study from some of America's most well-respected researchers that found that COVID shots were responsible for soaring sudden deaths around the world. And he has coverage. COVID shots are sole cause of soaring child heart failure. Top study confirms that one. You can find over on my X feed as well. And finally, let's just remember how they enacted the lockdowns on us. A little bit from John Stoss.
New guidelines for every American to follow over the next 15 days.
Stay at home. That is the order tonight.
Stay home. We can flatten the curve. We had 15 days to slow the spread, we were told.
100% of the workforce must stay home.
Now, I was already skeptical of government command and control, but I was still surprised at how authoritarian many politicians were eager to be. Those 15 days turned into years, and the loss of our freedoms increased.
This is not about freedom or personal choice.
It should have been. Instead, everywhere, politicians kill jobs, pass laws that make everything cost more.
Costs are going up everywhere, from the grocery store to the gas station.
They sped up America's path toward bankruptcy.
The largest stimulus bill in U.S. history, $2 trillion.
Politicians and unions closed schools and caused a historic setback for young people.
Scores decreased by the largest amount ever recorded.
And the deep state's rules probably killed people. COVID tests were available for use.
Hundreds of these machines are currently in the United States,
but
they're not allowed to test for the virus.
Not for coronavirus
because
yet.
you need FDA approval.
Yep.
4 years later, let's remember politicians' incompetence and their insatiable wish to gain power over us. Let's not give them power like that again.
Well, I'm just going to mention the Constitution doesn't grant them that sort of power. So how about people actually call these people to task and see this entire cascade of problems, ranging from Donald Trump's first initial mention of it, but even before that, the assumptions of the idea that the government can hand out money for schools, can hand out money for highways, Medicare, Medicaid, all these different types of things, the regulations they apply to corporations, every one of those things, unless those things are questioned, then the possibility of more lockdowns occurs. And they're still doing this sort of thing with the climate canard. They're doing this with farmers. They're going to try to do it through the One Health system with the World Health Organization, through poultry and cattle, claiming that they've got to be vaccinated, testing them properly with PCR tests. They're going to do everything they can to get more power. And they paid off people. They paid off pop media. They had the Pfizer executives handing them tons of money. They had their special privileges to be able to go to the White House. You couldn't go unless you get jabs. I knew people who were reporters who were trying to go to the White House, and they wouldn't let them in unless they get jabbed. This is the world in which we live. And unless people question the assumption of power, the unconstitutional assumption of power on all those different levels, whether it's funding of the states for education or Medicare, Medicaid, highways, anything like that, whether it's special favors to corporations or regulations over the corporations, anything like that, all those things, they got to be stopped. They've got to be stopped. They've got to be questioned all the way to the point of the very existence of the NIH and NIAID. And perhaps ask for a justified constitutional reason. Now, finally, I'll say this. Even if they were to set all this up and say, we're going to amend the Constitution. We're going to have an NIH. We're going to have an NIAID. We're going to have all these different policing agencies that Rand Paul wants. So that'll make it all hunky-dory. It wouldn't be moral at all. None of it would be any more moral than what they've been doing, because I don't have a right to tell you that I know better than you how to protect you. That I know that you will be better protected against a virus than you can figure out for yourself. And God save me if I do that to somebody and then a bunch of people want to come in and tell me that they want to do that to me. Finally, I'll just show you this. This is actual verification that I found of the diffuse proposal to DARPA. Project Diffuse, diffusing the threat of bat-borne coronaviruses, presented by Peter Daszak, 12/1/18. Places and periods of performance. They proposed it would start at 12/1/18 and go through 5/31/22. They would happen in Palo Alto, California, coming in Wuhan, China, Chapel Hill, North Carolina, New York, Singapore, and Madison, Wisconsin. Total funds requested $14,209,245. Date proposal submitted 3/27/18. Direct from the EcoHealth Alliance. There is the first letter. The Chief of Staff of the EcoHealth Alliance, Alexei Chmura. Dr. Peter Daszak, Dear Committee of DARPA, Preventing Emerging Pathogenic Threats, Preempt, please accept the following proposal. And there it is. Figured I'd just dig that up for you in case you wanted to see it. Had a little extra energy. Now, everybody, let's get to a few other things. And there's so much to cover. I actually abbreviated a bunch of things because some of this stuff can get long, it can get intense, it can get wild. So now I want to get over into our next segment. I want to make sure I got the theme. We need a theme for warfare, everybody. Let's hear from Time Zone. Yeah. Oh, yes.
Speak about destruction. Speak about destruction. Speak about destruction. This is a world destruction. Your life ain't nothing. A human race is becoming a disgrace.
Yeah, well, maybe not all the human race. We can't lump everybody together. Everybody is an individual, but I got to say, when people claim that the human race is going to go one way or another and they use government to do it, not a good idea. Not a good idea. All right, everybody, first things first. Let's first discuss the latest. And by the way, I just want to show you, if you go to antiwar.com right now, don't forget you can contribute to them. Look at all the stories that are in blue that I would love to cover today. There's so much big, breaking, important information. I'm going to try to go through this as much as I can. Some of these stories I'll just mention briefly. If you want to get more information, I've retweeted almost, I think, every one of these stories. You can find them on my X feed or go to antiwar.com. And you'll see almost all the latest ones are still on their front page. But to introduce the first one, let's go to Dave DeCamp of antiwar.com. And don't forget, everybody, it was just last week, and we played the video of Joe Biden claiming that they had a peace proposal. They had gotten the peace proposal from Israel for a ceasefire in Gaza. Oh, Lord be praised. Awesome. Great. So the genocide's going to stop. Of course, the United States could stop the genocide whenever they want to by stopping our money from being turned into armaments that Nikki Haley signs. That gets sent over to Israel. They, as somebody pointed out, I think it was Max Blumenthal over the weekend on if you get to watch yesterday, they did a Gray Zone Live. He mentioned, yeah, even if they stopped sending some of the repair pieces to Israel for some of their tanks or their helicopters. They wouldn't be able to fly the helicopters. A lot of the things for the transport of their munitions, they wouldn't be able to utilize them. He goes, within about a couple of weeks, you'd see a ceasefire because they wouldn't be able to operate. So there are a lot of ways that the United States actually could, stop that. And one of them would be actually by, again, conforming to their Constitution. Sorry to bring it up, but, we got to talk about the politics here. And yes, strangely, that's supposed to be the rule book for the politics. Let's go to Dave DeCamp to get the first report on the great Israeli proposal that somehow Joe Biden said was an Israeli proposal for a ceasefire. And then it turns out that, well, strangely, Israel, they have declined their own peace proposal.
All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Netanyahu aide says that Biden's ceasefire proposal is not a good deal. So on Friday, something unexpected happened. President Biden came out and gave a speech unveiling this ceasefire proposal for Gaza. And he kind of framed it as an Israeli proposal. But then seeing Israel's reaction, it seems like they certainly have not agreed to everything outlined in this proposal for the ceasefire deal. And basically what it is it's a 3-phase deal. The first phase would be a 6-week ceasefire, initial hostage and prisoner exchange with some other things like Israel withdrawing from populated areas in Gaza. And during that time, they would negotiate a permanent ceasefire, according to Biden. And then the second phase, there would be another hostage and prisoner exchange. And that's when the Israeli withdrawal from Gaza would happen. And then the third phase would be the start of a reconstruction of Gaza. So Biden made this pretty dramatic speech. He said it's time for an end to the war. Israel and Hamas, should both accept this. But Israel's reaction, Netanyahu's reaction, has not been very hopeful that there will be any kind of deal coming out of this. So there's been
I just want to mention also, by the way, again, kudos to Anti-War and Dave DeCamp, because this is the only place that I saw reporting. Remember last week when I reported on this, Biden was saying it would be a hostage release, right? But he didn't indicate whether or not the Israelis would release the hostages that they repeatedly, constantly, for years have been taking off the streets of Gaza, innocent people, holding them completely extrajudicially without any charges or due process in any way whatsoever. We're talking teenage kids, as I mentioned, 14-year-old kids in some cases, women as well. And the charges of original ICC charges against Netanyahu weren't actually about this current genocide. They were about crimes that were committed by Israeli forces on some of those people that they had captured, raping, torture, and things like that. That's one of the reasons that Netanyahu was cited a couple weeks ago for crimes. But this is very good because he actually mentions in his report, Dave DeCamp mentions that the original proposal, which is now defunct, of course, because the Israelis who supposedly came up with the proposal and then Hamas actually accepted the proposal, the leaders of Hamas who were in Qatar, who got millions of dollars from the U.S. and Israel so that they would sound oppositional. Well, they weren't actually oppositional this time. They said, okay, we'll accept it. Israel said no, even though it was supposedly their proposal, as Biden told us. But the good thing, again, you can rely on Dave DeCamp. He always shows his great stripes. What a great reporter he is. Everybody at Anti-War is just phenomenal. And they really do show themselves. It's at times like this, daily news, breaking stuff, important things, people's lives, so many important things and so many disparate opinions. And you got to confirm these things. And they're always on top of things like the Gray Zone, like Redacted, like Kim Iverson, Jimmy Dore. Look at what Jimmy Dore does. David Knight. These people are so sharp. It's just fantastic to see. Geez, look at Grand Theft World, right? They're just amazing. So kudos to those guys and kudos to him because he does mention here that those prisoners from Israel there would be a workaround to try to get those released as well. Of course, it doesn't mean that in the end, Gaza would not be a continued occupied territory, but at least they would stop the fighting. So I just wanted to bring that up. And of course, it's now a defunct proposal. So we're going to move on from there and talk about a couple other things that I think are pretty pretty valuable to bring up. I've got a lot of footage that I want to share with you. And so first, let's go into a couple text pieces because I don't want to let these slide. So you can see the headline at anti-war, Netanyahu aid, Biden proposal, not a good deal. Then we've got this. Israeli forces operating in most areas of Rafah. Near 40% of Rafah buildings have been damaged or destroyed. And then these two. Check this out. If people don't recognize Israel as the most aggressive nation state right now on the planet Earth, well, I guess the United States actually would be considered the most aggressive, but the most kinetically aggressive would be Israel. Israeli airstrikes hit Syria's Aleppo again. More airstrikes. It's just been 2 months since they fired into Syria, killing people in Syria. Well, they're doing it again. Israeli airstrikes hit Syria's Aleppo, 12 reported killed. Is that war or not? I mean, for goodness sake, the United States spent so many years trying to overthrow Assad. And again, that's when I mentioned, my friend Glenn and I were out at a Middle Eastern restaurant in 2011 or so. And the guy who managed the place came from that area and said, yeah, they're going to try to overthrow Assad. He's not a great guy, but they want to stop Russian energy exports. They want to stop the Russian pipeline. The Arabs don't like Syria working with the Russians. And of course, they want to have a U.S. connected pipeline to go around that area as well. So there you go. Here we have Israel. They're in on it as well. Israeli airstrikes hit targets near the Syrian city of Aleppo early Monday morning, resulting in heavy casualties. The Israeli army, Dave DeCamp writes, the Israeli army launched an air attack from the direction of southeastern Aleppo. Well, goodness, it sure is good that they didn't hit that 1/3 of Syria that the United States is occupying. The one where Donald Trump said, we've got the oil, we're on the oil in Syria. He never left, right? Remember when he bombed the airfield in Syria and I think 8 people died? I had a student who got really upset at me about that. He's like, yeah, Donald Trump did the right thing. I was like, really? You're in a class right now, and we're talking about civics, the Constitution, and what's in it. Find it for me in the Constitution. He got so angry, he got up and slammed the door. I had to go talk to him out in the hallway. It was intense. It was really intense. A military source told Syria's Sana news agency, quote, the aggression led to a number of martyrs and some material losses. The British-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights reported that 12 pro-Iranian fighters were killed, as they said, a term it usually uses to describe Iraqi Shia militias that operate in Syria, although the SOHR, that's the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, said some of the dead were Syrian nationals. And don't forget, the way the United States operates there is they're paying off all sorts of radicals as well. It's basically a mafia there, right? That's the way the U.S. does it. Now, this one, Israel also has another strike in Lebanon. Israel kills 2 and wounds 16. Israel forces struck South Lebanon. Airstrikes against southern Lebanon over the weekend, claiming to have hit 40 so-called military targets over the past 72 hours. It's just unbelievable. It's getting worse and worse and worse. It's insane. And what does John Kirby have to say about what the Israelis did? You saw me play it in the news feed, in the news flash. What does John Kirby have to say about what the Israelis did to that tent in Rafah? Killing all those kids, burning many of them alive, dropping armaments that are made by the United States. And reporters ask him, hey, are you going to not send them these things? Do you have any restrictions? Oh, we have expectations. Yeah. Well, again, here is what Kirby said, drawing out the idea that somehow it's okay because the United States engaged in war crimes as well.
We have conducted airstrikes in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, where tragically we caused civilian casualties. We did the same thing.
Okay. Did you see his face? Let me enlarge this. He shrugs. He shrugs. The guy shrugs. I don't know if he needs better training from these fatuous people where image is everything and actually actions don't mean anything. Killing people doesn't matter as long as you have the right words to package it up. Here he is again, shrugging. Sorry, going to the replies. Go back here. Here we go.
We have conducted airstrikes in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, where tragically we caused civilian casualties. We did the same thing.
It's we. It's all the royal we. Don't forget, you're part of it, even though you're forced. It's we. And it's comfortable. It's all comfortable. Everything's fine. Dead bodies. You know, drone killings through John Brennan and Barack Obama, and then, of course, into Donald Trump. Killing kids playing soccer. Targeting cell phones that might not even be with the target. And, of course, even if they were with the target, did you afford them a trial? No. No. Not at all. We just killed a so-called terrorist. Oh, you did? Did you give him a trial and prove it? No. Oh, by the way, we killed his son, too, and they were both Americans. Oh, that's very reassuring. That's awesome. Now, there's more anti-war real quick. This one, heading over into just amazing. This. Smotrich. Israel's Smotrich threatens to turn West Bank into ruins like Gaza. Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich has threatened Palestinians in the West Bank that Israel could turn their cities into ruins like the Gaza Strip. So, in other words, it's not about going after Hamas. It's about total domination of the area, as we have seen from the very Israeli people who are attacking the Palestinians, from the river to the sea. That's what it's about. Smotrich's threat comes as violence from Israeli soldiers and settlers in the West Bank against Palestinians continues to escalate. Since October 7th, over 500 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank. In a video posted on May 30th, Smotrich addressed his, quote, neighbors beyond the fence in the West Bank cities of Turkaram, Nur al-Shams, Suwika, and Qalqiya. We will turn you into ruins like in the Gaza Strip if the terror you are inflicting on the settlements continues. Terrorism against the citizens of Israel must stop. Really? So we've got 500 Palestinians killed in the territory, and he's claiming that it's the Palestinians who are engaging in the terrorism. Yeah. Gaslight. Have you seen the play? Yeah, I've seen it. Now let's switch over into the European theater, shall we? It's sort of like a risk board, except it's not entertaining. Here's the information about France that I brought up on the 80th anniversary of D-Day coming up, folks. France is inviting Volodymyr Zelensky to now give him the patina of somehow a great fight for freedom by having the meeting on D-Day. Seriously. They have here, France leads initiative on spending military trainers in Ukraine. And there's more. That's from the Financial Times. They're getting ready to send their troops over, and this is when they're going to announce it on D-Day. So people are protesting. They're protesting outside the Eiffel Tower. They put down 5 life-size coffins in front of the Eiffel Tower, draped with flags, to protest French troops being sent into Ukraine. Guess what happened? The police arrested them. They arrested them. That's the great French freedom. Everybody fought for that. That's France. That's the Vichy France being pushed out somehow, right? Not fascist in any way. Free speech all the way, 100%. It's great. Maybe not. Let's go to a little bit more here. Here's some key information that I wanted to make sure I shared with you. From Dave DeCamp. Here we go. Here's NATO. Dave giving it to us. Oh, sorry. Yeah, we got one of those wonderful ads. All right, here we go.
President Vladimir Putin against NATO countries allowing Ukraine to strike Russian territory with Western weapons. Stoltenberg said, quote, "This is nothing new. It has been the case for a long time that every time NATO allies are providing support to Ukraine, President Putin is trying to threaten..."
Let me go back just a little bit. I'll just read this to you. He says, NATO General Secretary Jens Stoltenberg on Friday shrugged off warnings from Russian President Putin against NATO countries allowing Ukraine to strike Russian territory with Western weapons. I mean, what is this? This is very clear. They're going to get France involved. That'll bring up Article 5 for NATO, because the French guys, if they get hurt, then that instantly makes it that NATO's going to engage inside Ukraine. They're already engaging without saying so. Why in the world are the French involved with this? It's, as I said, it's a quixotic quest. They're not going to beat the Russians. All they're going to do is extend the fighting, spend more money, see more innocents getting killed on both sides, and then in the end, there will be a sue for peace, and the Ukrainians will sue for peace, and 2/3 of Ukraine will become Russian. And that last third will become the new Cold War zone for the new Iron Curtain. And that's the way they're going to do it. So Stoltenberg, as Dave says, this is nothing new. It has been the case for a long time that every time NATO allies are providing support to Ukraine, President Putin is trying to threaten us to not do that. But you're not threatening Putin? Those Russians who were killed for almost 9 years by the Nazis, connected to the government that the United States put in 2014 in Ukraine, that wasn't a threat to Russians. That wasn't a threat. The breach of the Minsk agreement that was promised by Secretary Baker in 1995, was it? To the Russians, that if the Russians let the Iron Curtain countries go, NATO wouldn't try to expand into them. How did that all work? By the way, tomorrow night, I've got some excellent information for you about Ukraine, and this is in addition to what I got to show yesterday. I won't show it tonight. It's going to be a little shorter tonight. I'll show it to you tomorrow night on some of the history of the CIA use of Nazis in Ukraine. Very interesting stuff. Let's continue with Dave.
Us to not do that, end quote. Stoltenberg's comments came after the U.S. and several other NATO countries gave Ukraine the green light to strike Russian territory near Kharkiv with their weapons. The step marks a significant escalation in the proxy war and could provoke a major response from Moscow, despite Stoltenberg downplaying the risk. I mean, we've seen this. They always tend to do this. Putin warned that there would be serious consequences, and Russia warned the UK that if British missiles are used on Russian territory, Russia would hit British military sites. So very serious warnings from Russia. And Russia has already, significantly escalated its war in response to Ukrainian attacks on its territory. If you look over the past 2 years, you see this pattern. Back in October 2022, the bombing, the first time that the Crimean bridge, the Kerch Bridge, which connects Crimea to the Russian mainland, the first time that was bombed by Ukraine, Russia responded by launching major missile strikes on Ukraine's infrastructure, energy infrastructure, and things like that. And this was the first time that they did that they launched, major coordinated strikes on infrastructure across Ukraine. They didn't do that before then, and it was a direct response to that. They made that very clear. And then if you look at this offensive in Kharkiv, Putin says this is a response to the Ukrainian attacks in Belgorod, the Russian oblast that borders Kharkiv. And so you see this direct correlation. And again, I've said this before. People like Stoltenberg, people like Blinken, Lindsey Graham, they don't feel the consequences of these escalations. It's the Ukrainians who have to deal with it. So they don't care. And the question is there going to be a point where the NATO and the Western countries do feel the consequences?
I'll leave that question open. And just again, I'm not going to show, a lot of the great work of Dave DeCamp is available. Just want to show some pieces here, give you an idea of what's going on. And again, in order to sort of draw this out and get some other lessons that we can take with us and apply it in any situation, I do want to mention again, you know, we hear about kinetic warfare. We hear about war and the state of war, right? There are rules in the Constitution about a declaration of war, state on state, that sort of thing. There are rules in the Constitution that should have been recognized when the United States government didn't declare war and invaded Afghanistan, invaded Iraq, sat there in those nation states, still has people sitting there in those nation states, has set up bases all around the world. No declaration of war, you're not supposed to be there, right? That's according to their constitution, okay? But philosophically speaking, one of the key things that I do want to mention goes back to John Locke in the Second Treatise of Government. And it's a lesson in voluntarism. It's a lesson in pure philosophy. It's a lesson in anarchism, which is the concept of no human ruler, anarchy, no human ruler, only God. We are all created equally. No one is naturally designed to have a saddle on his back. As Jefferson said, no one is naturally designed or born to be riding him and have spurs, right? To paraphrase pretty clunkily. But no one is born with spurs to ride him. However, the idea of a state of war, we're seeing the kinetic warfare. We're seeing all of these munitions being put out all over the place, right? And, you know, the absolute crazy sickness of people like Nikki Haley and Lindsey Graham and others who will say these sorts of things. You know, John Fetterman waving an Israeli flag in front of Palestinian girls who were just asking for a ceasefire because likely their relatives are being ripped to shreds in a place that already has been an occupied corral for decades and made smaller and smaller and smaller, right? So again, there are two things. First, as far as defense goes, no nation state has a right at all. No state has any rights to anything because states aren't people. States are entities. So states don't have rights. People have rights. And the only way that states can exist is by usurping people's rights. So states are, by their nature, prima facie, definitionally, axiomatically opposed to rights. They are breaches of rights. They are anti-right. They are anti-person. Because the only way they can exist is by demanding that people give up portions of their salary against their will. States are involuntary. That's the key. No state has a right to anything. Certainly no state has a right to defense. Military members who voluntarily go into the state and get their weapons and get their salaries through the state's function of taxation and coercion and threats and intimidation, they have no right to defend themselves as officers of the state, as agents of the state. They have a right to defend themselves with their own weapons if they want to, but they have zero, absolutely no moral call to claim that they can carry a firearm that was paid for through illicit means and defend themselves with it. That's a non-starter, okay? So then we translate that into the increased offense of the United States sending weapons over contrary to their Constitution, right? But even if the Constitution allowed it, even if the Constitution were amended to say you can ship weapons to other nations even when there's been no declaration of war and the United States has no technical allies or adversaries, even if they had that in there, and then they could make all their pretend real according to their Constitution. Did I sign the Constitution? Did I say I'm part of that? No. It's a piece of paper that was written up by people centuries ago, and at that time, it only applied to the people who signed it. There is no such thing as representation in government because it's mathematically impossible. It's temporally impossible because the state is not voluntary. If there were real representation and it were voluntary, it wouldn't be a state. You can't get the two. You can't have voluntary participation and have it be the state. Because somebody, in order to have it be the state, by definition, people who don't want to be part of it, have to be forced to pay for it and run it. That's the way the state operates. That's a state. That's the polis, okay? All the rest is voluntary civilization, agreements, culture, agreements, contracts, free association. Government is not free association, and there's no such thing as a government contract. And they try to call it the social contract. You can have real contracts in society. As Bastiat said, Frederick Bastiat in the 19th century, he said people don't understand the distinction between society and the state. Society is that which we come up with voluntarily, our mores, our cultural exchanges, our trade, our free market growth, our property recognition. The state is imposed on us. And people constantly fight each other to find out who's going to run the state, to force the people who don't want to be part of it. That's the battle. It gets everybody fighting against each other. So to draw this out, to get the lesson to its nut, if you're in a philosophy class and people try to argue that John Locke and his philosophy, on which the Constitution is pretty much based, the idea of natural rights, as John Locke is, we're told John Locke was a defender of natural rights, and he claimed that men come together, all men somehow magically come together, because in the state of nature, he says, without the state, in the state of nature, men amongst other men would bicker and fight. They wouldn't be able to protect their property. So men voluntarily, all of them, agree to come together to form the state, which will protect their natural rights to property, because they're incapable of handling themselves in the state of nature. They can't come up with their own rules in the state of nature. Well, first, that's a self-negation. It's logically incompatible, because if he says that human beings in the state of nature can't handle their own affairs, they can't come to their own agreements, then how can all of them come to an agreement to form the state, John? An editor might have questioned you on that, but evidently you didn't work with one in 1670. Second, his assumption is not a protection of natural rights. It's a protection of the so-called social contract theory of Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes, who wrote Leviathan. Hobbesian theory is that, and I show this to the students, he wrote in, the 1500s or so, during the time of the English Civil Wars, he said, look outside, see, everyone locks their doors when they leave their homes. They carry weapons with them. They don't trust each other. And so the only way to be able to handle things, because people can't trust each other, people are inherently bad, is there has to be a supreme leader, a monarch, let's say, a government somehow that has all power, the Leviathan, and it will somehow represent the ideals, the mores of all the people. Somehow it will be transmogrified through that. Rousseau had the same sort of concept when he wrote his social contract, right? He translated that, did the same sort of thing. And of course, that popularized the very concept of the social contract. It was just basically warmed over, touchy-feely, occultist ideas of somehow the magic of the assembly will translate the minds of all the people and come up with exactly what is true. Rousseau even said that you couldn't question the decisions of the assembly because that was the general will. Some grand spirit comes out of the assembly and represents all of the French people. So whether it's Thomas Hobbes claiming that there has to be one central authority like a king or a monarch or a duke, or it has to be within some government house, or it's Rousseau a little bit later who says you've got the assembly and so on and so forth, or it's John Locke who says, well, people come together and they form a government that's supposed to protect their private property, which of course is a negation of its own philosophy again, because not only if people are incapable of handling themselves, how can they then cobble together a government if they're incapable of handling themselves, but also if they want their private property protected, how is it that they're coming together to create a government that will then take a portion of their private property to protect their private property? It's a QED. It's a non-starter. Any logic class, you just sit there, you say, none of these things make any sense. But with Hobbes, what's really interesting, and I've showed this to the students, Hobbes would claim, and I'll show you on this piece of paper. and I've done this before, Hobbes would claim that the atomated population, the atomized population. So if you have a person here and a person here and a person here, right? So you get all these different people, right? And they're all going to fight against each other, he says. Right? He says, look outside the house. You know, they carry weapons and so on and so forth. So you have to have a government. Well, the crazy thing is that as he's going through this, the example, he's claiming that that's the state of nature, just like John Locke. Without government, without an all-powerful government, people are going to fight each other. Just look around you right now. People are leaving their houses. And what he wasn't pointing out was his example came from a society that had a government. That was Hobbes. Nobody seems to bother questioning Hobbes on that. Hey, Thomas, how is it that the example you're giving of the state of nature is actually from the state of a state? Could you tell us that, Thomas? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to insult a vaunted hero of philosophy for the state, right? The other thing is, he says, therefore, in order to protect all these people, you have to have one giant ruler, the king, with his crown, and he'll decide everything to make sure all these people inside here don't fight with each other. All these people, right? That's the king. He'll be the all-powerful Leviathan. This is Thomas Hobbes, right? Okay. So then I say to the students, okay, what is a major flaw in another major flaw of his thinking? First of all, there's no voluntary free will in any way whatsoever, so you can't even tell what people value or don't value, right? But beyond the valuation concept of it, which is part of the economic argument against it, what other things? And so one of the students brought it up. She goes, well, yeah, if you pull out, I was like, yes, that's right. If you pull out and you go to different nation states, then you've got another king over here and another king over here, and they're all containing all their different people. So he says, so the idea is now you've created nation state, nation state, nation state, monarch, 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 king, 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 whatever it is, right? Because you don't trust the individuals inside those things. Well, these are all people too. Now you've just amplified the problem. And you've got nation state leaders who are controlling all these people, and they're not trusting of each other. They're ready to fight each other. You've just maximized the problem. You've just pulled out a little bit to a larger scale. So Thomas Hobbes was a so-called social contract theorist, right? The idea that the social contract has to be transmogrified into one big leader. The state has to be ruling. Then you got Jean-Jacques Rousseau, same sort of argument, right? And John Locke, they argue that, well, Locke says out of the state of nature, where everyone might fight against each other, you form the state. Now, the fighting part of it that he claimed was called the state of war. He said, within the state of nature, there's always the risk that man will conduct war against the other. And, he had these wide parameters for what war was: stealing, property, coercion, real physical fighting, that sort of thing. State of war, whatever the level of the threat is, whatever the heat of it is, whether you want to turn up or turn it down, it's still also some sort of aggression, right? So in other words, then he says, again, the assumption that everybody comes together, which is faulty, and that they come together to protect their property, right? So then he says they do that to avoid the state of war. So my question is, we look at all these things in Israel and Ukraine and all these other places, as the U.S. government sends weapons of war all around the world, in what activity are they engaged? Are they engaged against you? All the time. The state of war. All John Locke's philosophy did was assume that people would be pitted against each other in the state of nature, that somehow we couldn't come up with our own arrangements, which we do all the time, just even in conversation, right? Reaching a price point for a sale, right? All those things are done voluntarily. The ancient Irish had a voluntary system. The ancient Vikings had a voluntary system. So many societies had voluntary systems. And they reflect what people actually value, because they're not done through force. John Locke said, oh, that would never happen, even though it had already happened in both Viking Age Iceland and Brehon Law Ireland. If he had opened up a history book, maybe they didn't have him around when he was writing the second treatise. Maybe he was too busy protesting the papal plot days in the 1600s in England. I don't know, before he fled over to Holland, right? I don't know. But it would have been good if somebody just acknowledged the flaws of logic. All right? The only place you get real contract is in a voluntary place, and that's without the state. The state is the machinery of war. It always is the machinery of war. So, to conclude, let's talk a little bit about warfare against you. I want to show you the government conducting war against you and threatening war against, you got it, my friends, oil companies. So for that, we need a little theme. And let's turn to Cat People by David Bowie, putting out fire with gasoline.
And I've been putting out fire with gasoline. See these eyes so red, red like jungle burning bright. Those who feel me near.
Great song, great song. This is the original version from the film Cat People. And my brother and I always talk about it because it has the Charlie Callis sound after they do the chorus, putting out fire with gasoline. They do this weird sound that goes, vut, 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 vut. It's very cool. But we'll get to that another night. We've got to keep rolling, everybody, because, of course, it is birthday night. And I got to do some stuff with the family and things like that. So I hope you don't mind. But I'm going to show this crazy guy here. He's going to give you the story. Here is the headline first at MRC TV. This was released today. It's one of the two pieces I had released at MRC TV today, June 3rd, about DC Dems under Chuck Schumer. DC Dems, 22 plus Chuck, 23 and me, are calling for the Department of Justice to prosecute oil companies for what they call collusion. Yeah. Again, a little lesson in civics and the difference between freedom and government. Let's hit it and see this crazy skinny balded dude here.
Big government bullies are at it again, demonizing energy businesses for the high prices the government is creating. Now, these attacks may be angering, wasteful, and very harmful, but at least the government thugs give us something special. They give us opportunities to return to economics and civics classes and to remember who actually wields the aggressive power here. Hi, everyone. I'm Gardner Goldsmith for MRC TV. And here's the story. As Matthew Daly reports for the Associated Press, Senator Chuck Schumer, the Democrat of New York, and 22 of his Democrat Party allies, Thursday called for the Biden Department of Justice, wink, wink, to use every tool, as they say, at their disposal to prosecute what they claim is collusion and price fixing by oil companies, which requires us to ask a basic question. What tools does the U.S. Constitution stipulate that the feds have to prosecute companies for so-called price fixing and collusion? Well, the answer is easy. The answer is zero. There aren't any such tools. The Schumers of this world pretend that the Constitution's Commerce Clause allows the feds to control trade that goes across state lines. But father of the Constitution, James Madison, in 1825, told friend J.C. Cabell that this was a misreading of the clause. It was written as a remedial measure, allowing Congress to handle state versus state trade disputes. But that fact isn't stopping Schumer and his pals from posturing and using their tax-funded positions to bluster about federal prosecution of people just trying to bring us oil and gas. Writes Daly, quote, in a letter Thursday to Attorney General Merrick Garland and other officials, the Democrats said a recent Federal Trade Commission investigation into a high-profile merger uncovered evidence of price fixing by oil executives that led to higher energy costs for American families and businesses. No, you're not hallucinating. And perhaps this kind of fatuous rhetoric gets you thinking about this in ways like I think about this. I think about the many reports MRC TV has released covering the vast scope of not just the federal attacks on oil, coal, and gas exploration, refining, and even the mixture of fuel we put into our cars and our lawnmower engines. But I also think about the central government subsidizing so-called green projects like dangerous and unworkable electric vehicle boondoggles. And perhaps, just perhaps, this kind of aggressive Mussolini-like rhetoric inspires you too to remember who claims the legal power to take our money in order to fund their Senate salaries and fund this so-called Justice Department. Well, those facts sure put the terms costs and price fixing into proper perspective, don't they? According to Daily, the FTC, contrary to the real meaning of the Commerce Clause, got involved in the approval process when ExxonMobil offered to buy a company called Pioneer Natural Resources. The FTC claimed that Pioneer colluded with OPEC and OPEC Plus to potentially raise crude oil prices. And of course, though they allowed Exxon and Pioneer to close the deal, the FTC employed rhetoric that this alleged Pioneer collusion with OPEC, as they say, may have cost the average American household up to $500 per car and increased annual fuel costs. Now that has inspired Schumer and his 22 pals to claim, get this, that this alleged source of higher energy prices, the oil companies, well, they're saying that it's an unwelcome tax that is particularly burdensome for lower income families. That's a quote. Seriously, Schumer and many of the same leftist politicians who have ballooned government spending, which requires borrowing that the Federal Reserve funds through purchase of U.S. bonds. The Fed creates money to do that, and that inflation of the money supply destroys the buying power of everyone's income. Schumer and his pals have also shredded Trump's decrease of corporate income taxes from 35% to 21%. Those guys slid a new corporate alternative income tax into their insultingly titled 2022 Inflation Reduction Act. And in the 2025 budget, they've pushed another increase of corporate taxes to 28%. And they're pushing higher personal income taxes that, as the Tax Foundation reports, will see taxes eat an estimated $5.3 trillion of our income between 2024 and 2034. The increase in the corporate tax rate and the additional taxes on top earners would result in U.S. top marginal tax rates on income that are among the highest in the developed world. They sure care about our bottom lines, don't they? Heck, they care so much, they want to see the unconstitutional 19th century Sherman Antitrust Act shot at the entire oil industry. Offering this in the letter from Schumer and the 22 miscreants with whom he has so much fun in the Senate. Quote, corporate malfeasance must be confronted or it will proliferate. These alleged offenses do not simply enrich corporations. Hardworking Americans end up paying the price through higher costs for gas, fuel, and related consumer products. The DoJ must protect consumers, small businesses, and the public from petroleum market collusion, which lets us conclude by returning to class. This time, not civics, but economics. And of course, it lets us see what entity holds the power of coercion over us. In a free market, businesses, even corporate entities, have to compete. Thus, even those that might try to collude, as they say, with each other to raise prices can't raise prices beyond what consumers will accept, because an increase in prices tells potential competitors that there is money to be made in that field, and they will enter the market, thus increasing competition and pushing costs down with an increasing supply of the good or service. The only way businesses can claim monopoly power without having to worry about competition is if they can block new entrants. And the only way they can block new entrants is through, you got it, the power of politics, getting government or the state in its normative terminology to pass statutes that give the established businesses sole control or a cartelized form of control over the market. This is the lesson seen over and over in the history of economics, competition, and monopoly. The Schumers of the state, the big pushers of government power, are using their tax and spend superpowers of coercion, and they are making our lives worse. They're hurting our living standards with their monopoly claim of power over us. And now they want to use their so-called power, which doesn't even conform to the Constitution, to prosecute businesses that also are at the mercy of their egotistical, arbitrary, immoral whim. The only good thing that comes from their letter to Merrick Garland is the opportunity it affords us to learn which group claims the power to make others do things. It's not the oil companies. It's not your local gas station owner. It's not your home heating oil seller. It's the U.S. government operating in a way that Madison viewed as utterly inimical to the very Constitution he helped fashion. We can keep that in mind as we hear more and see more of their poison and their posing, their posturing, and their vile claims that they're helping us, even as they point the government guns at us and at business people, simply trying to increase the supply of what we want in the market. Thanks for watching, everybody. Hey, please like and subscribe. Follow us. That's the term they use on Rumble. Follow us on Rumble where they don't censor us.
Who's that guy? I don't know. He's kind of scary. Get him off the screen. Get out of here. Hey, got a nice comment from Razor Queen Official over on X. Needs more cowbell. And that was from a while ago. I got a fever. And the only prescription is more cowbell. No, guys. I'm telling you, you're going to want that cowbell in there. So good. Classic. And I want to give a big thanks to Harry Hart and also Michelle Obama and Max B. First, Max B tipped $5. Then Michelle Obama brought up the Vietnam, sort of pretty much one of the big events from Vietnam, Khe Sanh in Vietnam, 1968. And he says, do you think Rafah is like the siege of the Khe Sanh in Vietnam in 1968, or is that more for when Russia will inevitably take Odessa? I think it's the latter. And I know I can't talk to John McNamara about that, about the North Vietnamese gaining control of Khe Sanh after the American withdrawal there. But yeah, the McNamara line, remember that? Yes, indeed. But yeah, I think it'll be much more like that. Odessa and then Kiev will remain, I think. Yeah. I'm pretty sure Odessa is going to go into the Russian hands. Then we've got Harry Hart, and this is the final one. Harry, thank you. HH. By the way, did you notice that behind the Congress people on that video, it was a giant H, Harry? Well, let me show you. Let me see if I can find the shot here. I'll go back, see if I can get one of the wider shots, because when they got so upset at her and they showed the large scale shot. Yeah, there it is, buddy. This is for you, Harry Hart, and thank you. H, it's the giant H. It's like the big W from It's a Man. Where's the big W? There you go. It's the giant H for Harry Hart. In fact, if you look at my freeze frame right now, I've got two H's. I've got an H inside the H, right? There's the one with my little scrolly thing moving around there. There's the H and the H. So it's perfect for Harry Hart. Thanks, Harry. Harry gave me a great contribution for the show. $50. Happy birthday, Guard. Thank you, Harry. I salute you with some of my lemonade and protein drink stuff. Thank you very much. I salute to my mom and everybody here. Thank you. I toast to you, my friend. By the way, if you get to read some of F. Paul Wilson's work, a lot of you guys probably already know this, but you'll find out about the tradition of toasting. It came from medieval days when royals and monarchs would visit each other. In order to show that they trusted each other and that the fluid, the water, wasn't poisoned or the wine wasn't poisoned, they would pour a little bit of each of their stuff into the cups of the other person. So the clinking of it became a tradition for toasting and sending good cheer. I got that from one of F. Paul Wilson's stories. I can't remember which one, but that's where toasting came from. Or if you're a fan of Rocky Horror Picture Show, it's toast getting thrown in the air and landing on people in a movie theater. Hey, thanks for watching, everybody. A lot of good people over in X. Thank you. We're going to have a great time tomorrow night, and I'll see you in David Knight's chat tomorrow. A lot more to share with you as well. Also, that very interesting stuff that Grand Theft World put out there about the Trump charges. Absolutely fascinating. And I got to say, my nephew works for Chris Cuomo on his new network. And they showed a clip of Chris Cuomo on with Dave Smith on a program. And it was the Bet David program. And it was great. It was really, really good. I was very impressed by Cuomo. And hopefully he'll keep walking that path. That's good stuff. Also, I want to mention, if you go over to my Twitter feed, there is a new citation that I just put out there. Not a new citation, but a new X feed from Aaron Mate. And again, he brings up a great point. I'll finish with this, talking about the state of war. Okay. So we'll just do this to be very, very serious and fit this last bit in. Aaron Mate correctly points out the Middle East. Netanyahu is telling the world that he won't accept the ceasefire proposal that Biden falsely claimed Israel accepted. And yet the Biden administration is still clinging to the lie that this fall apart of it is Hamas's fault. Yeah, seriously. Let's hear this from the Department of State. Check it out.
Since the president's remarks on Friday, Secretary Blinken has been engaging in intense diplomacy with foreign counterparts to urge the completion of an agreement for a ceasefire in Gaza that would secure the release of hostages and set the stage for lasting peace.
Okay, so first of all, why do we have to be dragged into that? And how about you just conform to your Constitution, because supposedly it's paying your salary, and you not send those weapons? Then you got your ceasefire, and the rest of it can be worked out from those other people, and we can stop paying both Hamas and Israel. Israel that gets $3.8 billion a year, unless it's actually removed. It's going to be in there automatically every year in every omnibus budget. How about you leave me out of it, huh? Can I just be left alone?
Over that time, the secretary has spoken to the foreign ministers of Turkey, Egypt, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and the United Arab Emirates, as well as Israeli Defense Minister Gallant and War Cabinet member Benny Gantz. In all of his calls, the secretary has underscored the benefits of this proposal to both Israelis and Palestinians. For Palestinians, a ceasefire would see an end to the daily death toll in Gaza, an end to the destruction that has torn so many families apart and robbed children, women, men of their lives and their futures. It would allow hundreds of thousands of Palestinians to begin returning to their neighborhoods as the international community surges humanitarian assistance into Gaza and launches a major reconstruction effort. For Israelis, too, this proposal offers a path to a better future. It would bring home the hostages who have now been separated from their loved ones for 240 days. It would unlock the possibility of calm along Israel's border with Lebanon, where we saw continued terrorist attacks by Hezbollah just today. So the tens of thousands of Israelis who have been displaced from their homes for the past 8 months could finally return home. And it would set the conditions to finally realize the strategic realignment which Israel has long sought, improved relations with its Arab neighbors, and the isolation of Iran and the terrorist groups it funds.
So
this is the
let's just see if he can give us any documentation on that. And then we can compare the terrorist groups the United States funds. That would be nice. Hi, pot, meet kettle. Good to, I know, you know each other very well.
Ability that exists for Israelis and Palestinians today. As the United States said in a joint statement on Saturday with Egypt and Qatar, this proposal will bring immediate relief to both the long-suffering people of Gaza and the long-suffering hostages and their families. It offers a roadmap for a permanent ceasefire and an end to the crisis. The world should know, the Palestinian people should know, that the only thing standing in the way of an immediate ceasefire today is Hamas. The proposal on the table is nearly identical to what Hamas said it would accept just a few weeks ago, and it is now time for them to act.
Okay, so we have another lie coming from the State Department because Hamas accepted almost every part of it, and it was Israel that rejected it, even though they continue to claim that it's the Israeli proposal. I know, it's like Bizarro World. Oh, man, you got that bloody knife in your hand there, and there's a dead body, and I saw you stabbing that body, and no, that was Hamas. If only they would stop doing that. Oh, okay. Thanks. Can I stop paying you? No, because I'm going to do virtually the same thing if you don't pay me. I'm going to send goons with guns. Oh, by the way, you paid for those guns too, you anarchist. All right, everybody, I better get going. Hey, by the way, I wore my favorite color, orange, today. As you know, I gave Natalie Morris and the Morrises compliments on her outfit and the background that they had. Is super cool orange the other day. And I decided, my birthday, I figured I'd throw on some orange. And thanks for hanging out, everybody. Hope you had a great night. And again, Harry Hart, thank you so much. Michelle Obama, great name. I love it. Max B, thanks for being there. And everybody inside the Rokfin chat, you guys are cool. Super, super cool. And I also want to say hello to so many other folks. Nancy Chambers, she says, happy birthday, Guard. Many, many more. Thank you so much. And Free Thinker says, I'm June 10th. Hey, happy birthday early, Free Thinker. Fellow Geminis. Absolutely. That's so cool. Absolutely right. And was saying happy birthday, Guard. Absolutely. And Aram, thank you for being there. Max B, all of you, thank you so much inside Rokfin chat. Taylor Saunders, I see you're there too. And I want to thank everybody in Rumble as well. Thank you. Please share the links. Have a great, beautiful, beautiful night. You bring the smiles, and I send the cheer as well from the Goldsmith Mansion as my slack-jawed lackeys and I get ready for the peeled grapes. And we have a good night tonight, doing a little birthday cake with my sister and my niece. So that'll be a lot of fun. So welcome, everybody. Watch out for the bad guys. Don't forget those guys. Keep ringing in some good rock and roll and good cheer. And thank you also to my mom, memory of my mom and dad. They gave me many, many great birthdays. My mom going through birth. I was the longest baby born in the hospital where I was born. I broke the record. So my mom went through a lot. She was a tough lady. So good stuff. And thank you, God, for giving me the opportunity to be here with all of you. So thanks, everybody. Have a great night. I'll leave you with Going Out #2 and our King Kong action. And I'll talk to you tomorrow on David Knight's chat. Have an awesome evening, everyone. God bless. Thank you. And thank you for the birthday wishes. See ya.